Past legends. Past legends.
Tonight we are privileged to welcome Greg Edwards, current Central District CEO, but of course he played 43 games, kicked 162 goals, the first ever dog to kick 100 goals in a season, kicking 104 goals in 1982. Geez, he dominated in 82. Welcome aboard, Greg.
Thanks, Malcolm. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks for joining us, mate. We normally go through where you started your juniors, and looking up on your bio there, it was at Salisbury North there.
Yeah, my first club was Salisbury West. So mum and dad bought a house in Paraffel Gardens in 1962, the year I was born, and coached Salisbury West. He was their inaugural coach, and so I played first while we were living in Paraffel Gardens. I played there till about under I can't remember now, till about 1972. Or maybe 73, and then we moved house, and then I joined Salisbury North in about the under 13s, I reckon it might have been, or 12, somewhere around there. And then went to Salisbury High, so Salisbury North Footy Club was just up the road, and everything fell into place just nicely.
And started off do you play mainly juniors at the Dogs, at Centrals, or? Yeah,
I played under 17s. We won the flag in 1970. 8, I reckon it was, under Alan Stewart.
Yeah,
we beat Port Adelaide in the grand final. Then
the massively respected Alan Stewart, yes.
Yeah, and then I actually went off and played a year with Salisbury North A grade in their first year in SAFA.
Yeah,
and then came back and played a few under 19s games at the end of that year, and then played league the next year.
So did you play at North Adelaide as a junior as well?
No, I didn't. No. My dad played at West Torrens and North Adelaide.
Gotcha.
And so you debuted in 80, and then you were sort of in and out, but it's quite incredible that you really only established yourself in 82 and then basically dominated in 1982.
Yeah. No,
10 goals against Glenelg at Glenelg. I reckon, and we found that one. Now, this is on memory. We went through the Nord annual reports today, but they don't list the opposition goal kickers. But I reckon you kicked 7 or 8 against Nord when the Dogs kicked 22 goals and won easy
I reckon there was... So 1980, I played under 19s reserves and league.
Yep.
Played, I don't know, half a dozen games or whatever. Then established myself a bit more in 81. Then in 82, I reckon. Look, everyone hates talking about themselves, but I reckon I might have kicked a 10 or 11 against Norwood one day. But
I'm trying to think out of that whether it was. All I can remember that you dominated a game against Norwood, so it may well have been in that way. And unfortunately, it's a bit annoying. I've only found it today. The normal bit where you could look up SANFL football, the page has gone off. So that was a bit frustrating to find that out today, because that's generally what I use for and I would have found that. But yeah, I certainly knew that you dominated a game against us and Nord got spanked out at the Ponderosa.
We did spank a few sides that year, even though we ended up bombing out in the elimination final. I reckon we beat the Bays.
Yes.
By 20 goals down there, and
you kicked 10 that day. Yeah.
A big margin at Elizabeth as well. And I remember I must have the record of being in the top 2 leading goal kickers mid-season and getting dropped to the reserve. So I do remember that.
That was a bit bizarre.
I remember Daryl Hicks coming over and tapping me on the shoulder one night and said, "Look, son, I know you're leading the goal kicking, but you got to go down and play a few reserves and work a bit harder and all that." So I did that. And then I reckon we had to win. In 82, we had to win the last 9 games to make the finals.
Yeah, so I knew you came home with a rush, yeah.
Yeah, and then we had to win every game. And then when we did that, of course, we celebrated and probably celebrated a bit too much and got rolled in the first final.
Did you find the Ponderosa was a fortress during that period?
Yeah, a bit. We weren't, back then Centrals were, you're only talking the early 80s, so we're only 20 years old, or not even that, from a league point of view. But Yeah, I mean, Elizabeth was big. I mean, it still is. It still should be a bit more of a fortress for us than it is. It probably was back in the 2000s, but I thought it was. I mean, back in the 80s, the game was pretty open, and I used to like the bigger oval. I thought I played my best footy there, and the only time my first time I ever played full forward was in my first league game. So I saw it. I hadn't seen it from that angle before.
Okay. Where did you play mainly before that?
I mainly played as a half
Yeah,
forward,
that's what I thought it was half
sort of
forward.
flank. In sometimes I started in the centre square, but mostly as a half forward flanker. And Hicksy just sort of tapped me on the knee. And back in those days, I think we didn't have the interchange. You just went on and
Yeah. Mhm.
and
Yeah.
tapped me on the knee and just said, "Hey, young fella, get up to the play full forward and kick us a couple of goals." And so I thought, "Oh, shit, all right, no worries." So we did that, and the rest was history, as they say.
How did you find Hicksy overall?
Oh, I loved him.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It was absolute pleasure seeing him get inducted into our Hall of
Yes.
Fame in October. Daryl had a huge influence on a lot of people at Centrals, even after he coached. I mean,
Yep.
part of our Hall of Fame, eligibility, I suppose, is that, your contribution to Australian football. And, when you look back and think, well, Daryl really started off all the coaching courses when he worked at the National Football League in
Yeah, that's
Canberra.
true. Yeah. Yep.
So he designed all of those. And I remember when he coached Centrals, he made a video, a film of skills and technique, kicking and handball, and used all the Centrals players, and that was shown to all of the football clubs around Australia.
Yes. Yes, I remember that. Yep.
He was a real teacher, or he was a teacher, but he was a real teacher in the true sense. Um, and he should be lauded for doing all that, because he was a bit of a pioneer, and it was a bit like Alan Stewart. They had their own style, and
Yeah.
and their ability to create new things and innovate and all that sort of stuff. Hicksy was very much in that vein.
And huge respect for the Hicks
And
family
also
as well.
he for some of the poor efforts that we put up at times when he was coaching, for him never to swear was even a bigger accolade, I reckon.
That'd have been a tough gig, that's for sure.
And so, Greg, then your serious eye injury, and you've been always quite open since that you look at a person and running back into a pack now and cringe a bit and think no along that, but it was just a freak occurrence, and then it wasn't realised straight away. But then your doctor looked and saw your pupil wasn't dilating properly.
Correct. Yeah, no, that's right. So that was in a trial game against the Bays at Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Just running with the flight of the ball, and a big pack was coming the other way. And when you're young and silly, you don't really care. Probably didn't even look. You jump up, and next minute you're sort of down on the ground. You sort of, your legs get taken up out from under me, and my head hit the ground. So I think I might have told you, Malcolm, I swallowed my mouth guard, and for the next 5 minutes, it was all about the trainers getting any utensil they possibly could down my mouth, just so I could cough up the mouth guard, because it was stopping me from breathing, and then it cut on my throat when it come out, and that was the concern. So they took me downstairs to have a look in my mouth, and that's when the doctor noticed that when he put the light over my eye, that the pupil didn't dilate, and he thought straight away that that's a problem. So he whizzed me. So our club doctor took me straight to the eye surgeon on Melbourne Street.
Okay.
I think he rang him on the way there, or rang him before he left, and asked him to meet us there. Said he had a bit of an emergency case, so he did. So the doctor met us there, and I was under that doctor's care for about the next 20 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I found it bizarre where you then said you were going to be picked for a night game, and said to then Cowboy Neil that,
yeah, I did say to Cowboy.
Yeah.
So I trained.
Yeah.
So after that, I had a year off, because I wasn't allowed any contact for a year, because I had there's a lot of stuff going on sort of behind the eye and ear and all that sort of stuff. So I had a year off, and then that was 83. Then in 84, I was the runner.
Yes.
I ran for the reserves, did a few league games, got fit, did all the pre-season with them. And then in the end of 84, I said to Cowboy Neil that pretty keen to play again. He said, all right, well, do the pre-season training. And so I did, played all the trials and started off in the resis.
How did you feel in
And,
the trials?
Yeah, good. Like I'd trained, I'd done the whole
Okay.
pre-season, so I
Right,
had no problems
okay.
at all. So then I said to Cowboys, it was late in the pre-season when you remember we used to have those
Yeah, the
Escort Cup.
Escort
Then we
Cup
went,
games,
then we went into the season and we were playing Sturt.
Yep.
We played Sturt at Football Park early in the season after pre-season, so this is a real game. And Cowboys said, "I'm going to pick you this week," and I said, "Don't pick me, don't play me under lights," because I used to hate training under lights because you lose all your depth.
Yep.
And the lights make you lose your depth anyway, so it was even worse for me. And he said, "Okay, no worries." And then he came to me on the last training night. He said, "No," he said, "I'm going to play it." I said, "Well, I'd rather not play this game, my first game back." So I did anyway.
Yeah.
And that was the only game I played. I remember saying to him after the game that, that was. He said, "How'd you go?" I said, "Oh, that was bloody tough for me. I don't know how it looked, but I found it pretty tough." And so I didn't play the following week. I didn't get dropped, but what happened is so Alan Stewart, Cowboy, and Chris Grant called me to a meeting after that game, and basically said, "Look, we don't want to play any more games. We think you should stop playing. It's too risky." And I remember saying to them, "Well, play me in a day game. I don't have any trouble at training during the day, and I won't have any trouble playing during the day." And they'd made up their mind that they didn't want to play me, and I knew Alan Stewart very well because he was my coach in the 17s, 19s, and reserves. And he just wanted to err on the side of my health, I suppose, mainly him and Chris. So I went out and played the next couple of years at Freeling and the Barossa, and then I captain coached Salisbury North for a few years. So,
and did you have any
playing? But
how did you feel?
Yeah.
How did it feel playing? And surely, did you think, "Geez, surely should be playing league footy. Shall I have another crack even somewhere else?" Did that occur?
I did. Oh, definitely. I mean, I remember at the end of the first year I had it so I went out to Freeling. It would have been, I was there for more than half the season. We come top. And I was running around with a mate of mine, Ian McKay, who was the captain coach.
Yep.
And I got a phone call at the end of the season from Brian Fairclough and John Cale, and they asked me if I'd like to come out and do a pre-season with Port Adelaide. Now my brother was there.
Yes, that's
so
right.
My brother Russell played there.
Yep.
Played a dozen or so league games before he did his knee. And I said to him no, because I'd just agreed to sign. I just signed with Salisbury North to captain coach, and that's my old club, and I knew them all, and I'd really been looking forward to going back there, and I'd said no, so I didn't. So I ended up playing there for the next couple of years. But yeah, I did think about it, and I probably would have went back to Centrals if they asked me, but that probably wasn't going to happen. But I remember the first game I had at Freeling, my first real game after Centrals, and I got cleaned up, something shocking. Just got blindsided because I had to adjust.
Yep.
And I went home, and I remember I walked in and I had a massive black eye on my other eye.
Yeah.
That was my first game back, and Mum and Dad were a bit nervous after that. But I kept playing. I mean, you're only 23 or 4 or whatever. I mean, you don't know any difference really. I mean, it is what it is.
And
well, can we just take a step backwards there? You've obviously kicked 100 there in 82. Sorry. The experience of being able to achieve that moment, and obviously the crowd coming onto the ground, because it's something that a lot of people don't understand these days, that it was such a big thing, isn't it?
And the SANFL was a bloody strong competition.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was. There was a lot of goals kicked back then. I mean, I think the leading goal kicker that year was, I think it was Tim Evans. I think he kicked like 146.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And I came third, I reckon.
Yeah.
And then Trevor Pearson kicked 100 and he came fourth.
So, and I reckon Rocky was up.
Yeah,
there
Rocky was
well.
up there somewhere as well. He could have been up there right up the 90s and 100s as well. But it was good. I mean, we on the day, I was a bit nervous. I remember it, and Daryl was sort of. I think Daryl thought we'd win. We were playing West Torrens, and he was pretty keen to get it over and done with as soon as possible. And I went in there on about 98, I reckon, or something like that. And yeah, we got it done and had a good night, and the crowd came on the over. I remember one thing I'll always remember is, my favourite cheer squad member of Central Districts back in those days. It was a pretty active cheer squad member, and that was Darren Lehman.
Yes,
And I still
yes,
remember, because when you
yes.
played full forward, you literally were on the goal line while the ball was up the other end. And I remember Buff and all his mates in the cheer squad yelling out and all that sort of stuff. So it's funny what you hold on to after all those years. But
Buff played some reserves games, I reckon.
yeah, I reckon he did. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then he went back to Gore Centrals, and then of course cricket took over, I guess.
Yeah.
But he was a very, very passionate Central supporter as a
Yes.
kid, because he would have only been probably 14 then. Yeah, no, it was good. It was I mean, it's an achievement you look back on, I suppose, and be proud of. You obviously, in my case, you wished that your career went a bit further, and but it didn't. But at least I suppose I've something to hang on to. All fond memories.
Can you share a couple of conversations there between you and Buff on the goal line there?
No, I can't remember. I can't remember the
Buff would have been
conversations.
pretty
I just
young,
remember.
Yeah.
It's funny how you sort of become connected to people. I didn't see Buff for quite a few years after that.
Yeah.
And the next time I saw him, and I can still remember it, it was in the Melbourne airport, and he was getting off the plane in the Melbourne airport, and I was there catching a plane with my wife, and the Australian cricket team came out of the plane on the other side of the terminal there, and I heard a big noise. I heard a big voice yell out, "Megsy!"
Yeah.
I had a look over there, and there's Darren Lehman.
Yeah, he never changed. He's never changed.
Yeah.
Buff. Yeah.
He's a ripper. I love him.
He is. The wonderment there, though, I still can't work out that you've done the pre-season, so they've watched you train and all that. For me, it's still mystifying that they didn't say, "Well, yeah, we'll play you in a day game and go from there." I still will never understand that, Greg.
Yeah, I know. I don't either.
Yeah.
I've got no idea. I don't think I even asked the question afterwards, but I remember right at the start of the year doing pre-season, I remember sitting down with the coaches and whoever was involved, probably the captain or whatever, and saying, "Look," because I played in the trials and played pretty good,
Yeah.
and played a few reserves games and played good. That's why I went up. But I remember saying really early on, I said, "Look, don't play. I mean, I can train under lights and all that sort of stuff because there's no pressure really."
Yeah, and you're not physical contact. Yeah.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter if you don't mark everything as long as you do during the day. And I remember saying, "Look, if you think I'm ready, just don't play me under lights." Because back then we used to play the odd night game.
Yeah, there was just the odd bit. Yeah.
Just at Footy Park.
Yes.
And they said, "Yeah, no worries." And then of course my first game ended up being a night game. So yeah, I don't know why, mate. Selectors make funny decisions sometimes, as we know.
Is it a case of wrong time, wrong place? I mean, that was back in the day where you were on the ground for a good chunk of the game, and there wasn't bench rotations and
still doesn't make sense. Just doesn't make sense.
Concussion
for mine,
protocols and all of that kind of stuff. But you're right, it doesn't
make sense.
Yep.
So,
No.
Megsy, from there, what got you involved then in football administration?
Well, I was in the wine industry
Yes.
packaging business for about 20 years at a couple of different places. Very entrenched there. Had a lot of great friends there. And I was working with Ian McKay again. So not only did I play footy for him, but he was actually my boss for a while. I worked
Good
for him in
player
his
too.
company. Yeah, and so one day I don't know. I made a decision in my own head that I've had enough of the wine industry. It was getting very corporatised back then. It was the good fun of visiting the small wineries and getting to know all the winemakers. And I mean, I was in the wine industry long enough ago where I could actually make an appointment to see Robert Hill Smith.
Okay.
Now you can't make those appointments these days, and nor should you be able to. But that's how small and close the wine industry was, and all the suppliers and winemakers were all really close friends and all that, and loved it. And then it all changed. Everyone bought everyone, and it got bigger, and a lot of faceless people you had to do business with. So I remember thinking, "Gee, what else do I want to do?" And so I actually went for a job, the chief commercial officer job at the Adelaide Crows.
Okay.
So that was the job that Phil Harper had And when John Reid left, Phil moved into John Reid's football position.
Yep.
And Phil's job, which was the chief commercial officer, reporting to Stephen Trigg,
Yeah, that's right.
became available. So I actually applied for it, and I got down, presented to the board a few times, got down to the last two, did a presentation to the committee and Triggy, and the next day I was in the Clare Valley, and Triggy rang me and said, "Look, hey mate, sorry to tell you, but you've missed out. We've gone for the other guy who was I can't remember his name, a guy who worked for Channel 9 who was only there for about 6 months." He said, "But there's a job going at the Port Adelaide Magpies, CEO's job."
Well, that was good of him, at least in that regard.
Yeah, which he said, "I'd encourage you if you really want to get involved in footy. It's a good place to start to get involved." He gave me a bit of background as to what was going on. It was the same. It was basically the year that the Power and the Magpies were merging.
Yep.
There's a whole lot of stuff going on there. He said, and I remember him saying that you'll learn a hell of a lot in the next 12 months. So anyway, cut a long story short, I went for that job, got it, and stayed there for the year. The merger happened, which was great for Port, and then Glenn Elliott literally tapped me on the shoulder in a CEO's meeting with the SANFL one day and said, "Hey mate, you're not going to stay at Port Adelaide now, are you?" And I said, "Oh, look, probably not. The merger's happened. I want to retain a football role somewhere in the SANFL." He said, "Well, maybe you and I need to talk about you coming over to North Adelaide." And because Glenn was the CEO,
yes.
So I said, okay. So we went and caught up, and so I started at North. The deal was that I had a year as the football manager, because Glenn had been appointed, or soon enough was appointed, as the CEO of Adelaide United.
That's right, yeah.
So I went to North, was working with Glenn on the football program as football manager, and then the board, as we sort of agreed when I first got there, Glenn moved on and I moved up into his spot in 2010.
So did Port Adelaide not sort of indicate having a role for you with that new structure?
Yeah, I think back then there was an opportunity to take a commercial position with the Power, because my job obviously became redundant.
Yep.
But it just wasn't what I wanted. I mean, they were terrific, and Matty Richardson and all those guys. I enjoyed being there and all that sort of stuff. But once the merger happened and the Magpies were sort of then going to be part of the Power, and all those roles were disappearing, I wanted to stay really closely linked to footy and the team, and that football role probably wasn't available at the Power at that time in any sense. So that was fair enough, and I sort of got the impression that might be the case right at the start when I joined anyway.
Right.
And so everything was fine, and then this opportunity came up with North, and then nearly 12 years later.
Of course, you coached at North and coached a 17s premiership side.
Yeah, under 19s.
Under 19s, damn it.
So North
Shane
was really
played.
Yeah, North was really. I knew most of the people at North. I knew most of the board. I coached there for 3 years in the under 19s, and then I coached 2 years in the under 18s when it turned into an under 18.
Yep.
So I knew Glenn obviously really well, and all the coaches and all that sort of stuff. And plus, my kids were all coming through. So Shane was in the underage, or the development squads, and then he came into the underage when I took the 19s job on. And then Kim, my younger son, he was then just coming through the 13s and 14s as well. So it was good. I enjoyed those 4 or 5 years coaching North, and then I literally nicked off, went to Port Adelaide for a year and came back to North. So it was like I never sort of left.
Okay. And so you were North for 11 years?
Yeah, about 11. I reckon it was about 11. Yeah, about 11 years, 11 or 12 years. I got there in 2010, I think. I left in 2021, so 11 years.
What was the changing landscape of SANFL football during that period? Because obviously the Crows had been in for a few years. Port Adelaide had just come in. You're sort of around that decision and how that all moved on. And then, you're heading up an SANFL club. What was the changing landscape like?
Yeah, it was when I first got there, it was, I guess the focus for me was on getting North Adelaide back. I suppose had a few good years under Jars. Daniel Healy had just left. Josh Franco we just appointed, so that was one of the first jobs I had, was to appoint the coach. Josh Franco came in. We had a bit of success, lost to Westies in a prelim, then Norwood beat us in the grand final in 13.
13, yeah.
And then, I'm thinking, gee, this is nothing much changes in the SANFL, because during those first 4 or 5 or 3 or 4 years, nothing much did change. Then everything's changed since. So the 2014 entry of the Adelaide Crows and Port Adelaide, and all of the presentations we sat through, listening to Port and the Crows tell us.
Liking this podcast? Please like, rate, and subscribe.